Okay, Unit 9, Lecture 1C. I just left off Japan. We've turned to look at Japan a little bit. Japan had invaded and brutalized Manchuria and China. We have to remember Japan's an island nation. It lacks natural resources, so it needs to go outside to get the materials it needs for its war effort and even the food it needs to feed its nation. So the U.S. is going to refuse to recognize Japanese conquests, especially after they take French Indochina, which we'll talk about later on. That's Vietnam. All right, and not only do we refuse to recognize that conquest, we place an embargo, a ban on the sale of or export of oil and steel to Japan. Right? Japan needs these resources, so we refuse to sell them that. We're on our way to war with Japan too. We've been bouncing back. There've been a few incidents. I think the Panay, they strafed one of our ships. All right, we're bouncing back and forth with each other, and we're certainly on our way to war. All right. While negotiating with the U.S. over these trade embargoes and the bans, the U.S. the Japanese, without warning, carried out a surprise air attack on our naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. That's on December 7th, 1941. I want you to be aware of that date, okay? The attack is going to destroy much of our American Pacific Fleet. All right, it's going to kill over 3,000 American personnel. President Roosevelt will call December 7th, 1941, again Pearl Harbor, a date that will live in infamy. I want you to remember the quote, and he's going to ask Congress to pass to declare war on Japan, which they do immediately. All right, now Japan's going to attack Pearl Harbor. Why they do it is to gain control of the Pacific, right? And they hope by destroying the better part of our Pacific fleet, we would have a delayed response. They also believed that we would continue to focus on Europe, all right, and avoid a two-front war. So after Pearl Harbor, Hitler immediately honors his Axis Pact, his agreement with Japan, and he declares war on the United States. So Japan's thinking we're going to get focused on Europe right away because that's where our allies are. So the debates over isolationism in the U.S. are over, and the United States is involved. Okay, it's a true world war right now. All right, the United States, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union were the three most important countries that make up the Allies. Winston Churchill is the Prime Minister of Great Britain, the leader of their government during World War II. The Soviet Union had come into existence in 1917 with the Communist Revolution when they overthrew the Tsar, and Joseph Stalin had become the leader of the communist dictator of the Soviet Union. All right, in theory, communism is an economic system in which all property and means of production are owned by society as a whole. As practiced by the Soviet Union, communism is a form of government which both political and economic decisions were made by a small group of government leaders in the Communist Party. And we'll talk about that more later too. Quick look at strategies. The Allied strategy in the beginning of the war. Well, wartime strategies reflect both the political and military goals of the alliances, resources on hand, and geographical extent of the conflict. World War II, the United States is going to, and its allies, are going to adopt and follow a defeat Hitler first strategy. So almost all of the American military resources, the best of the American military resources, are going to be targeted for Europe. Okay, in the Pacific, American military strategy is going to be called island hopping. And this meant the United States would seize Pacific islands closer and closer to Japan and use them as bases for air attacks on Japan. In addition, the United States would cut off Japanese supplies through submarine warfare against Japanese shipping. Okay, the Axis strategy, the strategy by the Axis powers, which are the World War II alliance of Germany, Italy, and Japan, they're going to focus first on the Soviet Union, or Hitler as the Germans and the Italians. Germany hoped to defeat the Soviet Union quickly, gain control of the Soviet oil fields, all right, and force Britain out of the war through a bombing campaign and submarine warfare before America's full industrial military strength could turn the tide. All right, following Pearl Harbor, Japan invaded the Philippines and Indonesia and planned to invade both Australia and Hawaii. Its leaders hoped that America would then accept Japanese predominance and control in Southeast Asia and the Pacific rather than conduct a bloody and costly war to reverse the Japanese gains. Now, remind me in Class 2 to go over and compare strategies in World War II of the Japanese and the South in the Civil War. Okay? End of Lecture C.